Husker fans, you've not only seen this before, 5-21 in one-score games under Scott Frost, you just saw this a year ago in week 0. So it's a distinguishing quality of Nebraska football where, of course, classic Nebraska football is winning big games. But for Husker fans waiting for classic Nebraska to come back, I guess maybe this would be the new classic Nebraska. All right, a rough go to the season start for the Huskers, a big win for Northwestern, a Big Ten opener across the pond. We will wrap it up and give you our best here and take your comments and questions right here at the Voice of College Football, Nebraska. And we got, of course, our post-game host, Christian Hunt, on the line. So Christian's going to be with you each and every Nebraska post-game for the rest of the season. Christian, how you doing today besides the obvious?
There's a black hole, in my heart right now. It's hurting after this game. So other than that, I'm doing pretty good though.
Good to see you. Good to have you here. And again, we will answer everybody's comments and questions. So you ultimately produce the show. So leave them right there. And we will discuss a really good football game, but a really horrible outcome for a Nebraska team that really needed to get off to a good start this season. So Christian, as we take it off the top, of course, Nebraska got off to a strong start. Touchdown drive on the first time they touched the ball. Couple stops. Before you know it, they're up 14-3. And in addition to the score advantage, they just looked like the quicker, faster, more physically capable football team and just the more talented team, and looked like, hey, as long as they wouldn't make mistakes, they could turn this into a fairly comfortable win at one point.
Yeah, you said it best, Mark. I think the thing with Nebraska was they started off and their pacing, their tempo, their play calling in the first half was, it was perfect. It was exactly, if you're running a major college football, FBS program, exactly what you would want. And in the second half, this is, you remember when we talked about this, we did the breakdown of it and everything like that. We talked about what are the keys to the game? My keys to the game, believe it or not, Nebraska sort of did the old fake out, right? Like I thought they were going to try to throw it a lot more, and their pass protection wasn't going to hold up, and the run game was going to be kind of lacking. But I'll be honest, they ran the ball extremely well. They did a good job at running the ball when they wanted to. Initially, very early on, they were able to push the ball vertically, which is what Mark Whipple's known for. As the game, went on, though, Northwestern was only bringing a four-man rush up there. They were literally saying, "Hey, we'll let you run it. We don't care. We're not going to let you throw the ball on us." As the game went on, they started walking guys down in the box. They started blitzing in the second half. And I think that really started to change the outcome of the game. That was about where they started getting Casey Thompson out of rhythm and, sort of out of pocket. Now, on my own podcast, I've also said this. I said, Casey Thompson, to me, is a less athletic version of Adrian Martinez. I said that, right? I think, to me, if your offensive line's not great and you're going to have to run around and you're going to have to sort of make these elite athletic sort of plays, nobody is really going to be successful in that. You cut back to Casey Thompson though, and the kid is a great improviser. He made a play. What was it? I think it was towards the end of the first half or in the beginning of the second half, where he was running around for like 20 seconds, throws up a Hail Mary, and somehow finds a guy wide open. I turned to my father-in-law and I was like, if they're playing Michigan or Ohio State, that's picked. Like there's no way that happens, because Nebraska always has that bad luck, I feel like, and it's just, I don't know, man. I think in the roundabout way of all this, I just think it's, the things I thought they weren't going to be good at, they did better, but the things that I thought that they would do well, they didn't do well. You know what I mean? The coaching, you could definitely tell, slanted way more towards Northwestern, and that was the outcome of this game. The Northwestern was just the better coach team, and from the athletic standpoint, Nebraska should have won this game. It just was, Nebraska was the less they weren't the more well-coached team in that, right?
Yeah, so Nebraska comes into this game and they've got more transfers playing on this team, and not just total transfers, but playing integral roles. Of course, starting with Casey Thompson, O'Shawn Mathis, Trey Palmer, we could go down the list on both sides of the ball. And for the most part, they were showing out, especially on the offensive side in the first half. Casey Thompson's an accomplished quarterback, and he's actually playing not behind a good offensive line, but maybe a better offensive line than he played behind last year. And he showed early in the game, he had a clean pocket. For the first 10 or 12 throws, nobody was touching him. Then Northwestern realized, hey, we got to do some things up front to get to him. And they started to harass him a little bit, but he was still making throws. He was still making the throws that in the first couple times that he was pressured, I was really impressed with him still delivering the ball. But as the game wore on, I don't know if it was he just went into a funk, the combination of the pressure, and he went into a funk. But obviously he was a different quarterback in the second half than he was in the first half. And on the defensive side, my goodness, we're looking at a Northwestern team that, and I want to give them credit, but a team that's void of real game breakers, take the top off the defense kind of players. But they were just, they were working the screen game. They were working the counter plays. It was just a well-crafted game plan to keep Nebraska off balance. And Nebraska's pass rush, which has been non-existent during this 5-year run of Big Ten abyss, was supposed to be improved. And it doesn't look like it's improved because Ryan Hilinski pretty much stood in the pocket and delivered.
100%. Mark, it's funny because we go back to it, and one of the first conversations we had when you hired me to do this, I think we talked about it and we said, that was my take, right? If you're going to draw up like a team that you don't want to play opening week in a neutral site game in Ireland, it would be Northwestern, and it would be a quarterback of Ryan Hilinski. I mean, you go back and, I'm a big proponent of history repeating itself. I mean, think about this, right? Like, it seemed to me, and I kind of told my family, and they thought I was crazy for saying this, right? I said, look, this kid is, this team and this kid is like Air Bud. You know what I mean? They're the underdogs. Nebraska's kind of the rich kids across town that are just sort of playing them, and you line up and you've got a golden retriever at quarterback, and that's Ryan Hilinski. He beat Georgia at South Carolina on the road. And I know that because I grew up in Georgia, and you know what could probably come next from that. But my mother-in-law, who's a huge Nebraska fan, as well as I am now, texted me throughout that game and said, oh my gosh, your dogs aren't really doing anything. And I know Ryan Hilinski, and that's part of where I knew him from. And so coming in this game, I said, man, you have to watch Hilinski. And he was. Throughout the entire game, he was, when he had to be, he was efficient. He just kept, at one point in the game, I think he was like 10 for 10. He just kept dinking and dunking. And I'll be honest, Northwestern at certain points of this game, they wanted to give the game back to Nebraska. It felt like that, right? I mean, like they just were, at certain points where you're like, you got to go for it. You got to go for it. You know what I mean? You got to be more aggressive if you're the underdog, like Northwestern was on like fourth down and short, and they didn't do it. They just stuck to their guns. They kept punting. They played the field position game. It was ironic because they're playing soccer or rugby, and they just played the field position game with them. And Nebraska came out of that game, and they couldn't do anything with it. It's like sort of like, okay, we're going to give you the ball to win the game, and you either have to win. We're going to give you the chance to win this game, and they just couldn't do it. It just, as the game wore on, they couldn't make the plays that they were making throughout the first half. I think, the other part of this, and Mark, I kind of want to ask you a question, because I said this kind of leading up to, Nebraska and Casey Thompson and whatnot. And you said it exactly right. He was in the first half. I mean, he was an elite quarterback. I mean, he was accurate. He was making the plays. I think there was one play where I saw, like, he literally put it on somebody. They dropped the ball, and I was like, well, that's just them, I mean, but he was making every play you want to make. In the second half, he looked like a completely different quarterback. I mean, he turned the ball over twice. He looked like Adrian Martinez, to be honest with you. And Nebraska fans will know what I mean when I say that. My thing is to this, could you have seen this coming? You know what I mean? And the reason why I say that is if you had to rank college football in the Power Five as far as defensive conferences are concerned, would you have, because he came out of the Big 12, which is not typically known for defense. You know what I mean? And I've seen this in a lot of my comment sections. He lit the Big 12 up last year as far as touchdowns and yards and whatnot are concerned. Could you have seen that from your standpoint, jumping up to the Big 10? Like, let me ask you this. Sorry. How would you rank the Power Five as far as, conferences and defensive rankings are concerned?
Well, for me, overall, there's no question that the SEC is the best conference. And there's also no question in my book that the Big 10 is the second best conference.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to challenge the SEC with the Big 10. I think there's a clear distinction, but I also think that there's a clear distinction between the Big 10 and whomever else you think is third best. I tend to believe it's been the Big 12 at least the last year to 2 years. I think it's too close to call right now. We got to see the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC play it out, and we'll see. And I'd be shocked if one of them jumped up to supplant the Big 10. But specifically on the defensive side, I think that's where the gap is even greater. If you look at Big 12 offenses, they can play generally with Big 10 offenses. Ohio State's kind of a different deal. The difference between the two conferences, defense. And this is and it shouldn't surprise anyone that Northwestern fixed its defense. At least, I don't expect them to have a great defense. They're not loaded with great talent, but they had a deplorable defense last year. Nebraska rushed for almost 450 yards against them last year, and Northwestern was like bottom 3 in the country in rush defense, and that's not like them. They had lost their long time defensive coordinator, Mike Hankwitz, after the 2020 season in which they went to the Big Ten championship game, and they clearly missed him. And I heard Pat Fitzgerald over the last couple of weeks make a couple of comments that seemed, if I didn't respect him so much, seemed to be coach speak and trying to puff up his team and getting sick of hearing how bad they were, kind of rhetoric, like we're not as bad as everyone thinks. But I heard two things out of his mouth. Number one, we're going to surprise people defensively on how good we are. Number two, he said, and this offensive line was bad last year. They were bad everywhere. They didn't do anything well, pretty much. They had a couple of decent players like an Evan Hull at running back last year with 1,000 yards, but they were pretty much bad doing anything last year. And I heard Pat Fitzgerald make the comment the other day that they will have their best offensive line in 17 years since he's been there. Well, maybe they do.
Right. Man, did they? Here was my, again, like we talked about, like the keys to the game, starting the game off. I think I said Nebraska, again, like I said, it was a completely different than what I expected. I thought Nebraska was going to get after the quarterback and their run defense was going to be suspect, right? I thought that's what was going to happen. They didn't really get after the quarterback. When Northwestern wanted to throw the ball, even if it was like down the field, I remember it was right before halftime where they went to, Hilinski threw that ball wide open. That was Nebraska's strength, right? The pass coverage. They didn't defend it. They didn't get after the quarterback. They didn't defend it. And ironically, I thought in the first half, when I said it, I got my page and a half worth of notes here. Their run defense was actually surprisingly really good in the first half. They were stepping up. The walk-on Feist did a pretty good job, I felt like, at certain points. They got Devin Drew in there. They got I'm trying to think of the other kid, Stephon Wynn. They got some of these guys in, and they did a good job at plugging up the middle and sort of stopping Northwestern and forcing them to throw the ball. But as the game wore on, you started seeing more and this goes back to what I said early on, right? This is what I said on my own podcast. I said they didn't tackle in the spring game, and there's a difference with it, right? There's a difference when you look at Alabama, Georgia, some of the top programs in the country where they're physical and they demand that physicalness. You have to be physical, you have to wrap up, and you have to tackle. And this is exactly what I was trying to say. And people said, well, you can't really gauge anything out of a spring game. You absolutely can. And this is exactly what you gauge. You gauge whether or not a team is going to have these sort of principles that we talk about. They missed several tackles, Nebraska did, throughout this game, where guys are going to the outside, the perimeter, and they just make a guy miss, and they sort of run through a tackle, and they keep going. And that is such the important part of it. That's for me in this game, I think the question now shifts back to, I heard you say this, and I want to know if this rings true now. Mark, you said it last year when they lost to Illinois. Nebraska, you've rarely ever said a team season's over, in the first game of the year. Do you think that's true now? Like, do you think because they lost this game and what it sets up and who they have to play going through this year, do you think that's true now?
I think it probably is, but I don't want to make that same call for a few different reasons. Okay. Number one, I think this Northwestern team is probably somewhat better than the Illinois team that they faced last year. I also think that Nebraska's schedule is more forgiving in the Big Ten this year. They've got no Ohio State, Michigan State. They've replaced those two games with Rutgers and Indiana. So that's basically going from 0-2 to 2-0. And if they don't go 2-0, if they don't win those two games, then the discussion's over. Yes, their season is over. So they have to beat Rutgers and Indiana. So they've supplanted 2 losses in the Big Ten with 2 wins, or else, the conversation's null and void. I also think that Mark Whipple's a tremendous addition. I don't think he forgot how to play call in the second half. I just think Casey Thompson started to just misfire for whatever reason. For whatever reason, he got into a funk in the second half that I think was partially caused by the pass rush was more effective for Northwestern in the second half, but it wasn't devastating. He still should have made throws. He was still missing throws. And a lot of the misconnections, and I'll use the final throw for the interception that sealed the loss as a microcosm, because it wasn't like Casey Thompson threw a horrible ball. And it wasn't like though the receiver should have caught it for sure. It was just the ball was here. It should have been here. The receiver should have caught the ball, but still the ball shouldn't have been, a foot behind him and high. And that's where on really good teams, the teams that you've mentioned, either the quarterback just 9 out of 10 times, that's automatic. The ball's right between the numbers. Or when he doesn't make the throw, that 1 out of 10, well, the receivers are good enough to pluck the ball.
Right.
And those Nebraska receivers did that a few times, but they didn't do it every time. And when they dropped it, then it became, we're punting. And in that case, game over, they picked it.
Yeah, exactly. Believe it or not, actually, and I go back to this, Omar Manning, who was their leading returning receiver, didn't play in this game. I don't know whether he was academically or there was something going on there or whether he was hurt. So they featured Trey Palmer and Travis Vokalek a lot in this game. Now, in the second half, Vokalek got hurt. So you've got your 1 and 2 going down, and you're trying to spread it around a little bit more. And what I would imagine, like when you play quarterback, the biggest thing is timing. You know what I mean? So you've got your guys, you've got your 4, 5, 6 guys that you go through and you develop that timing with. And obviously, Trey Palmer is probably a fantastic athlete, but the way he runs routes versus the way the number 3 or 4 guy runs routes is completely different. And like you said, that's the difference of here and here, And that's the little, we saw it last year. I'll give you a good example of this. We saw it last year with Alabama when they played Georgia in the national championship game. When Jamison Williams got hurt, early in the first half, Alabama was a completely different team after that. They didn't have that speed that they could sort of throw to. You saw, Bryce Williams sort of not look like the same quarterback, and he looked bad comparatively, right? Because he was off on throws, but it wasn't that he was the Heisman winning quarterback was getting worse as the game wore on. It was more or less the guys he was throwing to weren't running a 4.340. They were just a step slower.
Yeah. And that loss was magnified by losing John Mechie the week before. So you had already lost probably your most reliable receiver, Williams, your most explosive receiver, and you're down to your 3 guy being the number 1 guy. We will pick off some of these super chats and get to these questions. Yep. We appreciate the contributions, folks. We've got Christian Hunt on the line, and Christian's going to be helping us anchor post-game throughout the Huskers season. And you can all cross your fingers that it's a better outcome going forward than it was today, which, hey, if you're just watching football and want a good season opener to just catch on week 0, hey, it was a really good ball game, close game down to the final drive. But for Husker fans, not a good start considering what you had to put up with last year, starting with a week 0 loss in the Big Ten, and what you've had to put up with for 5 years for Northwestern fans, for a season that looked like, okay, we may have to go through another 3-9, 4-8, maybe a little bit of hope. You're 1-0 in the Big Ten already, having defeated a division foe. So big win for the Wildcats and Pat Fitzgerald. Before I read the super chat, this may lead us into the rest of the conversation or the next phase of it, Christian. I looked this up some point late in the game. The 5-20 for Scott Frost, now 5-21 in one-score games, was out there all over the place. But then I looked up Pat Fitzgerald, now 20-9 in one-score games since 2015. So here you've got a coach that wins one-score games, coach that loses one-score games. All right, we got Benjamin Hutchin. We appreciate the super chat contribution here. And he points, Benjamin, here to a key point of the game that we were going to get to here soon. Did the defensive line stay in Nebraska? Yes, we talked about that. I'm completely disappointed right now. And why did they onside kick it? We beat ourselves again. Christian, 28-17 Nebraska, all the momentum, 11-point lead, had just scored again. Early third quarter after 21 points in the first half. That offense is rolling. And, if it worked, then, a la Sean Payton for the Saints in the Super Bowl against Indianapolis, it's like a brilliant decision. But they kicked it to a running back, too. It's also about execution. You kick it to a defensive tackle. You don't kick it to a running back.
Exactly. You kick it to an offensive lineman that just prays to God, you know what I mean? That gets that, one catch over the shoulder and thinks he's, I don't know. He just thinks he's like a wide receiver. You don't kick it, like you said, to a running back. To me, and you said it best, Mark, this was the Super Bowl for Nebraska. This is the first game of the year, neutral site game. We got to do something. Have you heard that? Let me ask you a question. Mark, have you heard this before? Special teams kind of let us down as a Nebraska fan. Have you heard that? I feel like that seems a little similar.
That was like game 1, and it was the last game, and then it was several games in between. It was like that was the narrative the entire season last year.
Exactly. And literally, I somewhere on this page and a half of notes that I've written, I wrote same team, same year. It's the same team, same year. It's the same thing. We're finding new ways to lose the game. You can't. And the reason why I say this, right? Like you can't make that because if I'm not mistaken, that onside kick was in the first half, right? It was right before halftime. Was it right before halftime? It was in the first half, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it?
I'll double check. I thought it was early third quarter. It was after they scored their last touchdown. So it had to be in the second half.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it was actually. It was in the second quarter.
They were up 28-17, so they didn't score after that. And Nebraska scored 2 touchdowns in the third quarter. So it was in the third quarter.
I get what they're trying to do, but you think about so many times throughout this game where you would take chances. And to me, that was just a weird spot to sort of, you get the momentum, you go up. What was it? 28-17, like you said. in a way that you're up 11 points, two possessions. Why give them the ball? Because at that point, if I remember right, now that I'm thinking back on this, Northwestern wasn't moving the ball. They were sort of stalled out. They lost momentum, and you give them the ball inside, in plus territory, basically. To me, that was the turning point of the game. And that's when I looked over to my in-laws, who have been lifelong Cornhuskers, and I said, well, that was the game. That was it. It was special teams letting us down again. And then it just, I don't know what it was. It was just, like you said, it was Thompson went from being, this elite quarterback in the first half. The second half, you go back to it, and he just started missing passes. And it was weird. It was like Nebraska is going to Nebraska, right? Like it went back to being a sort of like implosion. Like it was like you held a grenade in your hand and you're like playing hot potato with it, and you just let it explode. It just didn't make sense.
I can think of just off the top of my head 3 different games where Adrian Martinez turned the ball over, and I know that there were more, but turned the ball over on the final drive that ended the game. Down by less than a score, you got the ball in your hands, you can win it. There was one game against Iowa on the road a couple of years ago. Nebraska down 6. They drive it out to about midfield, and it really wasn't his fault. He gets blindsided by a tackle who misses a block, and boom, game over. Last year, ironically, week 0 against Illinois, another week 0, Illinois, final drive. They're down by a score. Adrian thinks he can escape the pocket. He gets strip sacked, and ball game. And earlier in the game, scoop and score off a strip sack. So he, really cost them with turnovers. Another game, Wisconsin last year. They're down by a touchdown. They're driving for the game-winning score. They're in the red zone, throws a pick at the goal line. Michigan State, he throws a pick in overtime, loses the game. Casey Thompson, bad throw behind the receiver, picked, game over.
Exactly. And it's turnovers at the worst part. It's turnovers at the literal worst part, of the game. I said this, and the reason why I asked you earlier, by the way, if you had to rank the Power 5 conferences as far as defenses are concerned, this is the way I would rank it. I would rank it exactly how you did. SEC, Big Ten. I think third, I would go ACC. Fourth, I'm going to go a little controversial. I'm going to go Pac-12 over the Big 12. But the reason why I'm going Pac-12 over Big 12, Oregon and Utah have really good defense. Sure. Utah is losing some, and then you got Washington. Sort of, they had a down year last year, but I think they're gonna be a lot better with Daybor out there. If I had to say, if you under pressure said name one Big 12 defender, I couldn't do it. I think the Big 12 is not a defensive conference, and that's what I tried to say. They're really well known. They've got great secondary play in the Big 12, and that was the whole part of Casey Thompson. I said, this kid is a little bit more accurate version of Adrian Martinez, who's less athletic and doesn't necessarily make the same plays, and is from an athlete profile. When you actually break it down, Thompson he's not as good of an athlete as Martinez is, right? So if you really stop and think about it for a second, okay, so 3 of our offensive linemen from last year, the 3 best parts of our offensive line in pass protection are gone. They're either in the NFL right now, and Cam Jurgens and I forgot the other guy's name, the other guard they had. They're in the NFL. And the other cat is suspended, right? So the 3 best parts of our offensive line from last year and what we weren't great at, which was pass protection, are gone. We're going to go out, we're going to get this kid, and we're going to hire an offensive coordinator. We're going to push the ball vertically. We're going to do all these things. It shouldn't work. I'll be honest, they surprised me. They actually played a lot better than what I thought they were going to do for this. The problem, to me, like you said, it just seems like let me throw this back at you here, Mark. Do you think it was, because I heard as the game went on, the announcers were making a big deal about this, and this has been sort of a whole off-season thing. How much control is Scott Frost going to really, give Mark Whipple? Do you think that Frost was like taking back control as the game went on? I felt like that almost, right? Like, I don't know what you thought.
I have no clear indication of that, but I had the same thought that that could be happening. And I certainly had that same thought when we came out of, was it coming out of halftime or coming out of a, no, must have been later. And it was later in the game. Yeah, I've got it. I got the page and a half of notes as well. I match you on that, Christian, almost per line, 1.5 here. And it was when there was 11 minutes left in the game. Yeah. And Casey Thompson had a couple drives stall, and all of a sudden Logan Smothers is in the game to run an option play. And I thought this has Scott Frost written all over it. And maybe it was discussed. And Scott Frost did make the comment here in the last few weeks that we're going to see multiple quarterbacks in the first few games, if not throughout the entire season. But I think that's a tendency of most head coaches to say, even if we hire a coordinator, especially on the offensive side, that has a big reputation, that it's still my team. And when it gets down to it, I'm going to, as things are going well, hey, we're up 34-7, we're crushing it, you're calling plays, hey, we're good. But if it starts to get a little uneasy, I'm going to pull in the reins and I'm going to take back some ownership. Yeah.
Well, and I just have to say, I'm super blessed in the fact that, my boss, which is you right now, you say, hey, I don't care what you do, just don't curse. Come on, just be insightful. That's all.
That was the
yeah, that I might have missed that a little bit, but whatever. Gee, dang it. No, I think, the great part of it is it's kind of a weird thing because I thought about this, as leading up into preparation of it, like, what business, what football team, like, go back in recent memory, has pretty much sort of said, hey, we're going to pretty much cut your buyout down in half, and you're going to take that pay cut. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to fire pretty much every offensive coach that you have. And you're going to have to go out and get all these guys that are sort of have had 1 year success and really not a lot before that. And we're going to put all this pressure on you, and you need to give you need to sort of give up play calling to them. When has that ever worked? You know what I mean? And to me, it just seems like Scott Frost is like, he revels in a lot of ways, I think, in the underdog role. And this is too big of a stage almost, I feel like, it's to where he's always expected to win, like majority of the games they're going to play, because of the talent that they recruit. He's a great recruiter, but he just doesn't utilize them the right way, right? Like, to me, it almost seems, I'll give you a great example of this, right? A lot of fans out here can probably relate to this. It seems like Kirby Smart at Georgia, whenever he gets a 5-star quarterback, he does not know how to manage that, right? Like Justin Fields, he goes to Ohio State because he doesn't play him. JT Daniels is at West Virginia right now. Sorry about you, right? Like, he doesn't know how to manage the elite talent he has. And that, to me, that's kind of what it is. It's like, you're going to come to Nebraska and you're going to do exactly what I want you to do, instead of like, hey, you're really good at run blocking, you're not great at pass block. You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of thing. I feel like it's a weird dynamic because they're talented.
Yeah, I'm not going to knock Kirby Smart's management of talent, considering he's running a top 3 program. I get the Justin Fields situation, but we won't go into that. So we got Mr. TW here. We appreciate the super chat contribution. Nebraska fans deserve better. It's time for the program to make a move on Frost. To lose with that much talent is Chad Morris-esque. Sorry, Nebraska fans. Demand better. Appreciate that, Mr. TW, who also chimes in with Happy Acres Retirement Home could run on the Nebraska defensive line.
It's a little aggressive.
And anything else? I don't think there's, yes, we do. We got Antoine chiming in. Antoine, appreciate you being here. I know it's rough for Nebraska fans, but at least your quarterback is nice. But now you got to do something about that defense. I pretty much know, Christian, who Casey Thompson is. And even though he was lighting up the defense like he was Peyton Manning in the first half. He was playing over his head, and then unfortunately for Nebraska, bad timing, not playing up to his capabilities. He's a good quarterback. He's a top 20 or 25 quarterback in college football. He's not elite. You've mentioned it. He's not an elite playmaker with his legs by any stretch. He's not by any stretch is he a statue in the pocket. He's got mobility, but he doesn't threaten the defense that way. And he's a really good thrower of the football. He's a good quarterback, and I still believe he's an upgrade, maybe not in a huge way, but an upgrade from Adrian Martinez. But yeah, the defense was awful, Antoine. You're right. They were awful, and they got off to a good start. First couple drives, they were stuffing the run, and Hilinski was completing passes, but they were wrapping the tackles up for 3 and 4 yard gains. And I thought, well, here's Northwestern going to have difficulty moving the ball like they did all of last year. And wow, they started to really out scheme Nebraska defensively, figured out what's going to work against this defense. And to everyone's comments in the chat, the defensive line for Nebraska, man, for a defensive front that signed a Big 12 second team all Big 12 conference guy in O'Shawn Mathis and Garrett Nelson, who was Nebraska's best defensive guy, especially on the edge last season, who was supposed to take another, leap toward being like an all Big 10 kind of player. Those guys virtually got no pressure on the quarterback.
No, 100%. I mean, their defensive line, which, by the way, going into this, I really thought, that was going to be the strength of what Nebraska was going to do. I thought, okay, they're probably not going to be that bad in the run department. They're going to be able to get after the quarterback. And, if the game comes down to Northwestern having to throw the ball to win, I would put my mortgage on Nebraska. And like you said, it just didn't come down to that. Garrett Nelson, you remember you asked me in the preview of this game, who was the impact player on defense? And I said, Garrett Nelson. I don't really remember calling his name that much really in the game, right? He didn't get out there. Mathis didn't really have, he had a couple plays here and there. And I think it was actually in the run game of all things. It wasn't even a pass play that Mathis really got involved in. The interior of the line, was kind of bouncing around a little bit. And my father-in-law, he was asking me, he was like, they're just getting drug off the ball, in the second half. And I thought that was more scheme. But the problem with it is, and this goes both ways, right? The problem with it was for Nebraska, you start going, 5-2, you start jumping into that, which I think they did towards the end of the game. They went from a sort of a 4-man front of 4-3, if you will, to a 5-2, which is what they started doing. And they started walking that safety down in the box. You start sort of pretty much keying in on the run. I kept saying, oh my God, if they play action this ball, it's a wide open touchdown. You know what I mean? So, and that's kind of what it felt like was getting ready to happen, but it just never happened. And that's what I'm saying. Northwestern, they could have made this a lot worse. It could have been they win 30. They could have been 38-28. But they took their sort of foot off the gas pedal there towards the end of the game. And those are the little sort of minute differences. Nebraska, and I think this is something that I'm gonna kind of harken back to what one of our good friends here, Greg, who's an inside reporter for Nebraska, had said, in practice leading up to this game, the offensive line was literally doing well enough in the run game. They were moving them off the ball. And that was my first key where I said, Nebraska is probably not going to be a great run defense this year. They're going to probably be better in pass coverage than they are at stopping the run. And that sort of seemed what like Northwestern wanted to do to them. They just wanted to run the ball, control the clock, and sort of play small ball, if you will, right? Like if we were talking about baseball, they didn't want to go for the home run. They just wanted to kind of keep everything within them. And Nebraska just felt very tense. It just felt, it just was a weird sort of dynamic between both of them. But yeah, the D-line certainly didn't step up the way we thought they were going to step up.
Yeah, far be it from me to question Pat Fitzgerald, who's one of the best coaches in college football. But, there were several times there, and it happened on their first scoring drive where they kicked a field goal. It was like 3rd and 7. They weren't tearing it up, but they had a nice little drive going. Hilinski was hitting all the throws, and it's like 3rd and 7, and they kind of they're on one side of the field. They're on the right hash, so they've got no room, and they just ran the ball, got nothing, and they were just settling for a field goal. And they did that a few times, and I thought, Hilinski's not making mistakes. I understand they don't have explosive playmakers, but they only need 5 or 7 or 8 here. And they seem to scheme up some kind of matchup where they're getting good gainers. Shoot, they rolled up. I'll look at the stats here in a second. Almost 600 yards of total offense. But it worked out. In the end, it worked out. But, one of those crucial times they played for a field goal. They pretty much just gave up on trying to get a first down, and they missed the field goal. And I thought, Pat Fitzgerald, what are you doing here? But again, I also went into this game thinking this is arguably the best head coach in the Big Ten, arguably. And Nebraska fans may tend to agree with me more today than they would have yesterday. But I said this a few weeks ago. This is the worst head coach in the Big Ten. And so that has to count for something. Real quick, Christian, I'll pick off some of these super chats. Gregory, thank you so much for the super chat coming in here. Tough loss today, but I'm sure Frost will rally the troops and have the guys ready to play and win next week. Just got a few loose ends to tie up. I'm taking that with tongue in cheek. I'm thinking that there's a lot of sarcasm wrapped up into that super chat there, but we thank you for that, Gregory. I believe that there's another one here. Let me try to track it down. Again, we got Christian Hunt here, and Christian is going to be co-hosting our Nebraska postgame throughout the season here. Lemansky, thank you so much for the contribution. Identity definition fits. Huskers identity equals TBD. Can you interpret that one for me, Christian?
As a millennial, I decline. I don't know what that means.
Definition. Fit.
Identity fits. Oh, okay, I get it. I think I see what they're saying there. Identity definition fits. They're talking about Pat Fitzgerald. Sure. ... Huskers identity.
Oh,
we don't know what they're going to be yet.
Gotcha. We know who Pat Fitzgerald is.
Right.
Nebraska, they don't have an identity. Gotcha, Lemansky. Thank you. Appreciate that. The Crypto Badger. Appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for the super chat. I've never been sick to my stomach after a game. I guess there's a first time for everything. And yes, Nebraska fans, I'm sorry. This has been going on for a long time now. You went to a bowl game in 2016. It used to mean something to go to a bowl game, but now like 80-some teams go to bowl games. So it should be like a foregone conclusion going to a bowl game. If you can't be one of the top 82 teams in the country to get to a bowl game, and now, my goodness, 2016, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of unquestionable things I feel like us Nebraska fans would do to have Bo Pelini back is starting to really set in. It's man, it is getting wild out here. Hey, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind, Mark. I want to ask you another question. I like to throw out a lot of different questions. I'm originally from Georgia. If you don't know, well, now you know. Georgia Southern. I keep seeing that as being a checkmark game for Nebraska. I said this while we were playing. I think Georgia Southern's a way more talented team than Northwestern is, simply by location alone. They don't have guys that you've necessarily heard of and are big recruited guys, but that particular part of the country, to me, is easily, that's easily one of the
Sure.
That's a hotbed of talent in college football. And so there's definitely some guys that you've never heard of that are going to be, I would say from a talent standpoint, Georgia Southern's about on par with Nebraska. Now I'm going to go ahead and assume that they beat North Dakota. It's not like they're playing North Dakota State and Carson Wentz is coming back to play in college football again. But they're kind of jumping ahead a little bit to Southern.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Southern, as much as Nebraska fans are just checking that game off the mark, and their history, by the way, they beat Florida. This was a decade ago, but they've beaten Florida. They've gone to overtime against Georgia. They've got some cats in the NFL. I mean, they're a talented school, and they get a guy in
Georgia Southern took Georgia to overtime.
Mark Rich era. Okay, it wasn't.
Mark Richt was a top 5 to 10 coach. They took Georgia to overtime.
Yes, look it up. I promise you, they took Georgia to overtime. They beat Florida. It was the Florida game was more memorable because the offensive linemen blocked each other, but they took Georgia to overtime. They've got guys like Matt Breida. They've got Younghoe Koo, who's the Falcons kicker. I mean, they have some talent at Georgia Southern, and they produce a lot of talent. They got Clay Helton. They got the number 2. Nebraska fans like to talk about Whipple and his offense that he runs. They brought in the number 2 guy who was the was it Western Kentucky? Yeah, Western Kentucky offensive coordinator last year, who coached Bailey Zapp. Remember, he was from a statistical standpoint last year, he was the best quarterback in the country. Even more so probably than Bryce Young, but that's kind of a hard comparison because Alabama versus Western Kentucky, you really wouldn't compare that. But when you look at things sort of more or less for what they are, he can coach. Like, they brought in a good offensive coordinator. They got Clay Helton, who reminds me a lot of Scott Frost. Think about Scott Frost in a non-Nebraska role. Clay Helton was at USC a few years back, last year, sorry, at his alma mater. And it just seemed like the stage was too big for him. He couldn't do anything. He was in a hotbed of talent, out there in California. He should have overperformed, and he just didn't. But you put Scott Frost at like a UCF, and they're just going to – it just is like they revel in that underdog role. My point with it being, I have a strong feeling Clay Helton at Georgia Southern, he's not expected to do a lot. He's already kind of comes into this and is, from a high-profile job to a small school. You give him enough talent that nobody's heard of. I don't know, man. I think that could be a lot of fans of Nebraska are saying it's a checkmark game. We're going to win that. No questions asked. Let's get to Oklahoma. It's a trap game, in my opinion, bro. What do you think?
I think you're onto something there. I can think of a number of times that Nebraska has played the likes of South Alabama under Scott Frost and some other teams, and they Northern Illinois and some games like that, and they didn't blow them out. They struggled to win those games. I am curious about this Georgia Southern game, so I'm looking at it right now. Absolutely, you're on it. 23-17. Georgia scored. What I found kind of interesting is Wikipedia said that Mark Richt did not coach that game. It would have been one of his last games. It would have been his second to last game, but he finished out the regular season before he got fired.
Yeah, what was that? 2014, 2015?
2015. They're showing that McClendon coached the game. But anyway, regardless, that was Mark Richt's last season at Georgia. Yeah, 23-17, scored a touchdown, Sony Michel in overtime against Georgia Southern. I would have just thought I would have remembered that game because of an SEC power almost losing. But anyway, that one slipped by me. I think you're onto something because it's always a role of us commentators, analysts / fans to try to predict, okay, what is the psychological impact of this kind of deal? Is Nebraska going to be extra motivated, come out mad, punch somebody in the mouth? Or, this is a Big Ten loss. This team had aspirations of challenging in the Big Ten, and now they've lost to what was supposed to be one of the worst teams on their schedule. And they may be flat, down. Now, they've got time to recover because they're not playing next week, but they're coming back the next week. So, I think you're onto something because, there's not – it's difficult to judge the talent actually between those two teams, but you bring up some really good points. You're not going to find Georgia Southern in the recruiting rankings anywhere close to Nebraska, but you bring up some really good points about these types of programs that have, have they challenged those types of programs on a regular basis when they play them? No, but on a fairly regular basis, 2 out of 3 out of 10 times, let's say, will they throw a huge scare into somebody like that? And this Nebraska team is probably, I'm almost going to guarantee, not as good as that Georgia team in 2016.
Right. It's and you said it best. They kind of, you can make the same argument, right? To me, here's what I see happening, right? I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth for just a second. Someone said Georgia Southern is garbage. If Frost and Children of the Corn lose, goodbye Frost. Have a fun year. Go Illinois and LSU. Well, you know what I mean? Crazier things have happened. Coming into this year, in the comment sections of every video, I'm sure that both you and me have posted, it's always sort of been like, look, we're just trying to be realistic. We're trying to give you sort of, insightful sort of things that could happen. And it sort of seems to be Nebraska is going to go at least 8 and 4. That's the worst case. We can't lose to Northwestern. We're not going to lose to Northwestern. Well, we did. You know what I mean? This is the build up to this year crescendoed right here. It absolutely, crescendoed right here. And I mean, you think about it. It just makes sense. If you think about what they're going to do, they're going to beat North Dakota. They're not playing North Dakota State. If they were playing North Dakota State, I might have a different take on it, right? North Dakota State can shock a lot of, major college football programs, right? Like, I just think for me, if I'm looking at this and I'm really thinking about it, the Georgia Southern game to me, like they're going to beat North Dakota. I don't have any doubts in my mind. You know what I mean? I think where the season starts getting interesting is by how much, and I'll say this, I'm not predicting they lose to Georgia Southern, by the way. I think they beat them. But how much do you beat them by? Last year when they played Buffalo and they played, Fordham, they beat them by 40, 50 points. That game against Georgia Southern is going to set, to me, it sets the tempo for Oklahoma. But it's so weird to predict Nebraska because, Mark, I feel like you might be able to sort of, pontificate upon this a little bit more. Nebraska is a team that they play up or down to whoever they play. They can play Michigan or Ohio State and lose by less than a score, and then they can go out there and play, and you're like, oh, my God, they're playing Illinois this week or Rutgers or whatever, and then they can go out and lose by a field goal, and you're like, what? It's a weird team to predict, I feel like, if you have to predict them.
Absolutely. Per Dennis Dodd, according to the real Hayden, and we appreciate the contribution there, quote, I think our offense staff has got to learn you have to be more creative in this league. Scott Frost, direct quote, I've never seen so little accountability from a Power 5 head coach. I don't necessarily believe that the issue in this game was lack of creativity on offense. I think you had a lead quarterback play in the first half, and you had a bottom 30 or 40 quarterback somehow play in the second half, and you had a defensive line that couldn't pressure the other team's offense, and you basically just had an awful defensive performance after the first couple drives of the game. I don't expect Northwestern, I do expect them to be improved from last season, but it's not like Nebraska just faced, the Florida Gators of the Steve Spurrier era on offense. And they gave up some ridiculous amount of yardage. The very first touchdown Northwestern scored, when they showed the ISO of the slot receiver, he just ran straight down the field. He just ran from like the right slot to the left hash, and nobody picked him up, and he was just wide open. Just a complete blown coverage. And Hilinski just played pitch and catch Now, a high school team could do that. It was just bad. It was really bad.
No, I mean 100%. I mean, and you think about the game, it's simple stuff that, like, if you really stop and think about it, if they were a little bit better coached, I guarantee you this shouldn't have been a game. You know what I mean? This should have been an absolute blowout. You know, per Dennis Dodd, well, actually, this is not per Dennis Dodd. This is Scott Frost, direct quote. I think our offensive staff has got to learn. You have to be more creative in this league. You know what's ironic about this? You know, Mark, when you discovered me, one of the things I had made a video on was about Mark Whipple, and it was about Pat Narduzzi's comments on him. And Pat Narduzzi said, hey, when we were playing, I forgot what team it was. It was in the ACC championship last year. I think the Wake Forest. That's what it was. It was against Wake Forest. Pat Narduzzi, if you think about it and you go back and you break down his comments on Mark Whipple, said the same freaking thing. We should have probably ran it a little bit more. You know, we were just throwing it a bunch of times. Kenny Pickett, you know what I mean, was getting hit. Now, you go back and you break that down. I don't think he was necessarily right in that. I think really the big thing is football, college football especially, is just such a rhythmic game. You know, if you can throw the ball better, you know, if you're a better passing team and you got that rhythm, keep throwing the ball. You know, for me, this is where the game was won and lost. Nebraska, especially in the second half, you have 4 or 5 running backs that are really good, and your offensive line is blocking really well, especially in the run game, right? Keep running the ball. You know, run the ball like it's 1995 and Scott Frost is back there running the triple option. You know what I mean? Keep running it. Like, you don't have to throw it. Sorry, you don't have to throw it, you know what I mean, and get creative or whatever have you. Just simplicity. And that's, to me, that's what this offense is sort of missing. I think it's one of those kind of classic scenarios of, you know, we're overthinking. You know, you get too smart, you get too cute at certain times, and that, to me, is really what it comes down to. It's just coaching in those key areas.
All right, folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football, and we've got our first result of the new college football season. And much like 2021, it opens with a Nebraska loss against a Big Ten potential cellar dweller. Illinois defeats Nebraska last year in week 0, and the Huskers are off to a 3-9. And now the Huskers coming back with what we thought was a much improved team, falls to Northwestern in Ireland, a 31-28, really entertaining game, but the Wildcats win it down 14-3 at one point, and it was, again, as we outlined, 28-17 when Nebraska just had scored a touchdown on a, to underline your point, Christian, Anthony Grant just went like 45 or 50 yards for a touchdown, perfectly blocked play. He broke some tackles. He's off to the races, and they turn around and try an onside kick and kick it to a running back, and Northwestern got the momentum back and scored 2 touchdowns to close it out after being down by 11 to win it. Christian here is going to be co-hosting our Nebraska post game here at the Voice of College Football after each and every Huskers game. So you're only stuck with me this one time, maybe a few more. We'll see. All right. Super chat coming in from Mark. Appreciate that so much, Mark. Surprised to see 214 yards rushing against the Nebraska defense that normally has been good in the Scott Frost era. Christian talked about that. That has typically not been a huge issue, stopping the run. It's been more pass rush. Secondary's been good for Nebraska in the past, missing tackles all over the place today and non-existent in the pass rush. But yeah, once Northwestern got it going, Evan Hall, 22 carries for $119. That's 5.4 yards per carry. Cam Porter, 19 for 94. That's 4.9. Those are healthy numbers. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, again, going into this game, you know, if you would have polled the average Nebraska fan, we probably would have said, yeah, I think we're going to have, probably 4 or 5 sacks in this game. It's going to be just, we're going to force them to run the ball on us. I didn't feel that. You know, I mean, I didn't feel that at all. It just was just real easy. You know, it just was, again, I think that as the game wore on, like starting off, their defense wasn't bad. I'll say that. Like in the first half, the defense did a good job at sort of limiting the run game and forcing them to throw the ball. But as the game started wearing on, and you could make the argument for really both sides, right? For both sides, they had to run the ball. You know what I mean? Like Northwestern, every time Northwestern or Nebraska started running the ball, like it was 10 yards, 15 yards, 20 yards. You know what I mean? It just was boom, 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 boom. They were just moving down the field by running the ball. It wasn't these like elaborate 15-yard verticals. It wasn't anything like that. It just was, death by attrition sort of, for both sides, really. I mean, to me, Mark, I know you're going to, there's a lot of stuff to sort of break down in the comments section here, but Mark, what do you gain from a game like this? Do you think Nebraska is like, how do you gauge this game? Like when you really look at it, when you look at a Northwestern team, and I guess it might be really hard to sort of look at that because we just kind of have to watch the season go, but how do you gauge it? When you watch the way Nebraska played in this game?
I don't want to overstate this in cataclysmic apocalypse type terminology, like this is the end of the world or anything, but this is a pretty horrendous loss. Northwestern is a team that we all, if you follow college football, you understand the deal at Northwestern. Not much talent, very resourceful program that is well coached, one of the best coaches in college football. They have put together a program where they know exactly, like Lemansky pointed out, they know their identity. They don't try to be anything that they're not. They are going to win in their good seasons. They're going to win with like one of the 20 or 25 best defenses in the country. And most of that's going to be because they didn't take 5-star recruits that were destined to the NFL regardless. They took 3-star recruits and they put them in a position to possibly play in the NFL. And we've seen it all over the place. They just produced their first ever 2-player in the first round in history NFL draft in 2021. 2 Northwestern players drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. So their recruiting's improving, but still nowhere close to the teams we typically talk about. A resourceful offense, power running game, nobody on the perimeter that's going to blow the top off the defense. Nobody. Malik Washington's a nice receiver. He would be a 3rd or 4th receiver on and I'm not even going to go to the Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State receiver room. I'm going to go to like a Penn State receiver room. Yeah. And he's going to play. He's going to play, but he's not going to be the number one guy. And so I don't think Northwestern's going to be the train wreck that they were last year. I think Pat Fitzgerald plugged holes. I looked at it this week. They added 4 transfer portal guys in the front 7. We talked about how confident and how good he felt about his offensive line this year. I think they're going to be a probably fringe bowl team, 5-7, 6-6, something in that range. But Nebraska is supposed to be challenging for the Big Ten West. They're not getting out recruited by Iowa and Wisconsin. They're getting out developed and outworked. They should win this game by what the point spread indicated, not in a walkover like they did last year, but they should win this game by 10 to 14 points. They should win this game 31-17, and it should be a hard fought game, but they're clearly the better team with the better personnel, and it should be a Big Ten win. But no, they blew another game.
100%. I think here's the reality of the situation. I've been very critical of Whipple, but I think Whipple did a good job. Here's the reality of, I guess, when you really think about what I'm saying. Mark Whipple, the offensive coordinator for Nebraska, can be an excellent guy. Like he can help transform. Somebody said leave Scott Frost in Ireland. Thank you, Charles Blake. That's pretty good. But no, seriously, like with Whipple, my thing with it is he needs time, right? Like he needs time to be able to, like if you give Whipple, and Casey Thompson 2 years, just 2 years, I think they can do a fantastic job. Like if Nebraska can do enough, and this is the key of it, if they can do enough to win out this year, which we can get into this here in a second if you want. But if Scott Frost can do just enough to keep his job this year, I think next year, man, they're going to be really good. I really think so, because you're going to give Whipple some time. You just need a little bit of breathing room. Right now, it doesn't really feel like that. And I said that kind of leading into this. It just feels like a pressure cooker environment. They felt the pressure. It didn't go well. You know, I'm not saying their season's over. You just need something to build upon this year. You got to do just enough to literally show Trev Alberts, you know, the athletic director, hey, we're doing really well. We're able to sort of do something here that we haven't been able to do, and we can do that. You know, you were talking about recruiting, and I want to kind of get back to that right now. As far as recruiting is concerned, you know, Scott Frost is a guy that, since he's taken over the program, they've ranked Nebraska's averaged about the 24th best recruiting class. So they're a top 25 recruiting class. You know, I wrote an article about this before the season started. You know, is it the coaching? Is it the talent? Or is it both? It's not the talent. You know, to me, whenever you have a top 25, you know, recruiting class, it's not really about talent. It really more or less comes down to the conference you play in and how good of a coach do you have as a game manager, you know? And to me, this is the talent alone. And you said it, they should have won this game by at least 10 to 14 points. You got to have somebody that can manage the game. And it just, to me, it seems like as the game went on, Whipple started the game off in control of this game. He started calling the play. I don't know this. And again, this is purely a hot take. So if you're going to go scorch earth on me in the comment section, please. I love it. I think Frost, as the game went on, started feeling it, because as a Nebraska fan, you started feeling the game start slipping away as the game kind of went further on. I think Frost started sensing that, and he started taking back more control of it. It's like, oh my God, if this goes bad, I'm getting fired. You know what I mean? At the end of the year, like if we don't win this game, this is the pinnacle of the season. If I don't win, I'm about to get fired. And I felt like he started feeling that pressure. He takes back control, and this sort of mismanagement starts happening that we started seeing. You know, you throw Smothers in there. Now, some of it's just bad luck. I mean, literally some of it's bad luck. You know, one of those throws that Thompson had where literally the ball was 7 yards out of bounds, you know what I mean, on the tight end that was wide open as he was breaking out. You're like, what in the heck's going on? You know what I mean? There's certain things like that. And a lot of it's decision-making by the quarterbacks. But if you go back, and I'm going to kind of throw a little wild ball out here. I'm a little all over the place sometimes. I love talking about college football. I get so passionate about it. But if you go back, and again, I always talk about this. If you watch that spring game, this was expected. You go back to his first play, you bring up the spring game, and I said this in the podcast I did. The first pass Casey Thompson had was a very accurate throw. It was a 10-yard out route that he hit, you know, a slot receiver on, and he put it in a position where the guy was double covered, and he put it in a position where only his guy could literally make that play. If you're playing an all Big Ten nickel, defensive back, that's a pick six going back the other way. But because it was Nebraska, it was probably a fifth, sixth string guy that was playing nickel there, dotted him up. Go back and look what I'm talking about in the spring game. That very first play Casey Thompson had, because they sheltered him. They didn't play him in that game. They didn't want Northwestern or anybody else to know what they were doing. There was a tight end wide open in the middle of the field. Wide open. The next closest guy was 10 yards away from him. And I said that. I said I was like, man, like this is one of those things where like you're in a game-like environment, you throw it, you make the wrong read, and it's funny because 4 or 5 months later, it just comes to fruition. It seems like when the game mattered the most.
See the comment there on the screen, everyone. Exploring with Ben. We appreciate you encouraging everyone to hit the like button so you can join us on Patreon. What you get there is you join us on Discord. So go to patreon.com, search MarkRogersTV. You get a link to join us in Discord, which is a 24/7, 365 chat room. So basically what you're doing right now in the chat, talking college football with anybody you want to, you get to do that 24/7, 365. We got plenty of people on there that if you want to talk Huskers, you want to talk whomever, we've got college football fans from all over the map there. So it's $5 a month. In addition to that, there are after show parties over there. There are a lot of other live streams that you can take part in addition to the Discord. And you also get my predictions, which, by the way, I said take Northwestern in the points. So you get my predictions as well as the predictions from about 15 other media contributors right here. And as Exploring with Ben says, us knuckleheads, you can talk to us 24/7 right there. Christian, you made a point about recruiting an average class of 24th in the country. The last one was 32nd. So I just looked at the 2019, 20, and 21 classes. So the 22 class, which you're going to have nominal impact from the current class because obviously they're freshmen and some of them aren't going to factor in. They need a year on campus to grow their bodies and get ready for major college football. But this actually underlines it even more. Those three classes were 17, 20, and 20. And that should be the core of your team right there. That should be almost everybody. And they supposedly, and I agree with this estimation, they supposedly had the best transfer portal compilation of any team in the Big Ten. And I think they did. On paper, I agreed with that assessment. But that was the result today.
Well, I'm gonna throw out a name, and Nebraska fans know who it is, and I guarantee you know who it is too, Mark. It's Wan'Dale Robinson. Does that name sound a little bit familiar to you?
Yeah, I've seen the guy play a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, he got drafted pretty high last year because he transferred to Kentucky. You know what I mean? He realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm not getting utilized the right way in this system that Scott Frost is this offensive genius, and I'm going to transfer to Kentucky. That's part of it. It's about mismanagement of talent. In the Kirby Smart comment, I'm not saying every player. I'm just saying particularly quarterback positions, right? A fifth-string walk-on quarterback that is a 8-year player shouldn't be winning national championships, although it makes a great Disney story. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that when you throw it back to Nebraska, and what I'm trying to say here, I guess, is I personally think that, Frost, he does a good job at recruiting. He pitches, Nebraska. He pitches, the Nebraska Republic, by the way, if you couldn't tell by the shirt. He pitches the Republic really well. And Nebraska is a landlocked state in the middle of the country. You shouldn't be getting a top 25 recruiting class like from a geographical location. So he does a great job at recruiting. I think it goes back, kind of like you said, to what he was doing. When I went back and I looked at what he did at UCF, he got it. Part of it's the location he was at. He was in Central Florida, which again is a hotbed of talent. You've got all these kids that you've never heard of that are out here. Maybe they don't have the grades to go to a Florida or a Miami. You know what I mean? Which arguably, if you don't have the grades, they're going to figure out a way to get you there. But, there's only so many kids like that you can get. So maybe he's down there and they can kind of sort of put pins in different, individuals that they can get in the team. But I think a lot of it is we're a smaller school. We're going to sort of spread the ball out. We're going to kind of go out there and we're in a weaker conference and we're going to start to play the ball on the perimeter a little more. And you look at when he comes to Nebraska, that's exactly what he did, right? But they're not playing Houston. They're not playing FIU. They're playing Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, Ohio State. And those guys, those cornerbacks are like the size of linebackers in that conference. They're coming up and they're absolutely thumping guys and they're getting through those blocks and they're forcing you to pretty much throw the ball vertically. And it just is, to me, it's a schematic sort of thing. It comes down to the guys they're recruiting. And Greg talked about this when we had sort of, did the preview of this game. They're very, very talented individuals. But are they talented individuals that are run blocking specialists, right? Or are they talented individuals that can sort of step back and pass protect? Because I'll be honest, if you think about this for just a second, it's easier to run block compared to pass block. I'm going at you as opposed to you're coming at me.
Christian, did he freeze up on us?
Oh no, sorry. I got a little done. I started realizing I get a little excited, like I said, about talking about college football. I think it's my main point with all this was I think it's it's easier to run block than it is to pass protect. It's easier to coach it anyways,
Sure.
you know, just because you're going to go man on man, mano a mano, you're taking the wood to him versus when you're pass protecting, you've got a guy that is way more athletic than you are, you know, and you're trying to sort of manhandle him, you know, but you're giving him the ground. It's really tough.
David Hooper raises a point here. Do you think Nebraska will fire Scott Frost before October 1st? If he's still employed around then Nebraska saves $7.5 million in a payout. Is this correct? I don't know if it's correct. We can certainly look into that. We've got a Nebraska show that we deliver every Tuesday at 7 Eastern, 6 Central, and we can certainly discuss that at that point. But again, I don't know that, but so for a school like Nebraska, with the resources that Nebraska has, that is a factor, but it is not the factor. They're going to make the decision that they want to make in determining the fate of the football program to win. They'll pay off a payoff. They'll take care of that, especially if it's $7.5 million. That's not going to sway their decision in any such way. Sure. Is that going to be discussed? Yeah. But shoot, that's not going to, they're not going to keep Scott Frost because they don't want to pay a buyout.
100%. Nebraska's blessed in that way. They're a top 30 program, traditionally speaking. They can, exactly like you said, Mark, they can dip into whatever pool they want. If they want you, they're going to have you. They're giving the cat the benefit of the doubt. They're giving him the hometown discount because he's a Nebraska legend. You know, if it was anybody else, he'd have been gone.
There you have it. And at the time that he was hired, I certainly could see the decision being made and understood why he was a hire, and I thought it would be a good hire. He proved himself as an offensive coordinator at Oregon and as both offensive coordinator and coach at UCF, lifting them from a horrible place to a 13-0 season and a Sugar Bowl win. And then he goes to Nebraska and he's the favored son. And it just seemed like the perfect story and the perfect outcome. But this is what it is after 5+ seasons now. Christian Bryant's here. He is Christian Hunt is here. My apology. Christian Bryant, a safety for the Ohio State Buckeyes about 10 years ago. Christian Hunt here anchoring our Nebraska post-game shows as the sun crashes in the windows on me here. Christian will be here all season for Nebraska post-game. Christian, anything else that you would like to hit on?
Mark, I'm just going to tell you this. If your Ohio State Buckeyes would have recruited me, by God, we would have been 6-time national champions.
Oh, okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, I think that pretty much, for me, that covers it. You know, I think it's going to be an interesting season. There's going to be a lot to break down. And I think it's, you know, it's one of those things where the season's not over. You said it best. The season's not over, but this has got to be the wake-up call of all wake-up calls. It has to be. You know, you can't lose this game and get caught flat-footed against Illinois, Georgia Southern, Rutgers, those kind of teams, right? Because if Frost, he's not losing to North Dakota. But if he loses to Georgia, like, let me ask you this. I got to go to the bathroom just real quick, but I'm going to ask you this question. I'll let you answer, and I'm going to jump back in here. If he loses to Georgia Southern, he's 1-2 going into the Oklahoma game. Do you think they fire him, depending on the Oklahoma game?
So I personally don't know Nebraska's thoughts about how much they're going to gauge this particular loss. It's certainly not a positive on Scott Frost's record. My thought going into the season was that Scott Frost would keep his job if Nebraska went 8-4, and he would lose his job if they went 5-7. 6-6 or 7-5 would be in the gray area where the administration would determine, okay, how competitive was this team? Did injuries play a factor in them losing some games? Were they competitive against the best teams on the schedule? Did they have any bad losses, of which this might be able to be placed in that category? And lastly, what does recruiting look like? So that would be the 6-6 or 7-5 evaluation for Scott Frost. The 8-4 would be, regardless of how possibly ugly at times it could be, would most likely keep him in Lincoln. And 5-7, regardless of how many excuses could be made about how good they looked against the better teams on their schedule, no way he keeps his job at 5-7. It's just not good enough in any conceivable way to keep his job. 6-6, 7-5 would be somewhere in the middle. Christian's going to a situation in which he's basically laying out a loss to Georgia. I got to think that, and again, these are questions of conjecture because I don't work in the administration. I don't have these conversations. They've given us no indication that they would make a move this early in the season. However, if they lose to Georgia Southern and they're 1-2, and then they've got, of course, Oklahoma, I got to think that unless they're able to bounce back, and nobody can really conceive them losing to Georgia Southern and then beating Oklahoma, but that happens more often than you would think. It's certainly happened many, many times where a team loses to that low of a team and then they somehow figure out a way to beat somebody that good a week or two later. So that's possible. But I would think if they lose to Georgia Southern, Christian, that he would have to beat Oklahoma to keep his job. If he's at 1-3 with 2 losses coming to 2 of the teams that they were supposed to beat, and now they're looking like their November run is Michigan, Wisconsin, Purdue, Iowa, Minnesota.
Yeah, 1,000%. It's the hardest stretch. The last 3 games they have, it's Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa. That's the hardest. It's the hardest finale to a season that you could draw up for a team. I think, and again, I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but I think the best case scenario in that situation is you go 1-2, maybe 2-1, right? It just depends on sort of the luck of the draw and how they progress throughout the season, how healthy they are, and how healthy the other teams are too.
Beto, thank you so much for the contribution. Appreciate that so much. And yes, I have always done my best to be a bright and shining light for all of us here at the Voice of College Football. Once again, Christian Hunt is going to be co-hosting our post-game Nebraska show throughout the 2022 season. So join us each and every week after the Nebraska game. And I will be back here after the Florida State game, which I understand is being delayed right now by weather, but I'm going to be back here after the Florida State finale to talk some more college football with everybody. And that will be solely not here on the Nebraska channel, of course, but on the main channel and on the FSU channel as well. And of course, we'll get it cranked up in full next Saturday with just about everybody playing and all the various post-game shows available to all of you. But we appreciate everybody being here. We had about 600 plus strong on the line. Christian, thanks for your analysis and repping the Huskers despite the difficult loss. And we will see if there's a quick and sudden turnaround, because the last point I'll make here is that the difficulty in the schedule now is that while there's almost, to Christian's point, 2 guaranteed wins, but not for sure 2 guaranteed win the next 2 games, that's not going to prove anything. If they go out and win the next 2 games 50-0, there's still going to be doubt, uncertainty about whether this can be a successful season because of what we just witnessed. These next 2 games, those have to be wins. And even if they're impressive wins, they're going to be looked at through the scope of what happened here against Northwestern. And so this team cannot prove anything to any of us until they play Oklahoma.
1,000%. Mark, can you do me a huge favor before we sign off real quick, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I need you to shoot Greg a text, and I need you to ask him to pick me up. I know last time I came on, I talked about a shillelagh. which is, by the way, if you don't know, it's a walking stick. I need you to shoot Greg a text and ask him to pick me one of those up on his way back out of Ireland.
The shillelagh. Very nice. Very nice. Yes, Greg headed on back from Ireland. Hopefully has a better trip back than the Huskers will have. That's a long, long trip back after suffering that kind of loss in game one. Again, everyone, please subscribe to the Nebraska channel right here. The reason you do that is you turn on the bell for the notifications to know when we go live, and lock it in here at the Voice of College Football. And we'll be back after the Florida State game, both on the main channel and the FSU channel. Thanks for being here, everyone. Christian, it was great to have you. And we will see you back here after the next Nebraska game for post-game wrap.
Sounds good. I appreciate it.